Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in a couple more minutes. All right, welcome everyone. We're excited for all of you to join us in the continuation of the Build End-to-End IoT Solutions workshop series. Today we're going to be focusing on device provisioning at scale. My name is Pamela Cortez. I'm on the Azure IoT product team focusing on improving our developer experience, growing developer community, and creating technical content to train all of our different partners, customers, and developers globally. So I'm excited that all of you are here joining us. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is part of a workshop series. If this is your first time joining, love it. We're super excited to have you here. And if you've been joining into our other sessions, glad you came back. And we're excited to continue this workshop series. So the first part of that series, we talked all about transforming your business with IoT. The last one, we talked about devices and device communication. That was really all about IoT Hub and how to get started there. Today, we'll talk about device provisioning at scale. This is really for us to deep dive into what is the device provisioning service and how do you scale millions and millions of devices. The next one, we're going to be focusing on messaging processing, analytics, and business integration. And if that looks like a lot, that is a lot. We will be covering time series insights, Azure Stream Analytics, Event Grid integration with IoT Hub, and we'll start looking into the data storage as well and different messaging types. So this one's going to be that next week is going to be very jam-packed. So we're really excited for you to join that one. And then lastly, we'll focus on Azure IoT Edge. So if you're looking to bring intelligence down to edge devices, that one is the one you're going to want to go to. We'll teach you how to deploy AI models on the edge and just working with the Azure IoT Edge runtime. And if you want to know where to register for those webinars, workshop series, we have the vanity link right there. These slides will be available for you, so if you're scrambling trying to get all of the links, don't worry, we could provide those for you. All right, so what are we going to cover today? First, we're going to go through the overview of what device provisioning service is. We'll go through developer tools that help you get started. What type of support do we have for VS Code, Visual Studio, the command line? So we'll go through that. And then we're going to jump into the lab. So part of the lab that I'm going to show you today, we're going to create an IoT hub. We're going to create a DPS resource, and we're going to focus on group enrollment, but you can easily apply this to individual enrollment. And we're going to focus on X509 certs. And then we're going to go ahead and create a simulated app to send device telemetry to IoT Hub. And then after we're done with that, we're going to talk about deprovisioning. And this is really an important part because there's multiple steps that you need to take to deprovision if you're completely retiring devices or removing DPS. So we'll deep dive into what are some best practices there. And then at the end, I'll go over some developer resources and how to get started. And before we move on with that lab, after the event, I'll give you a link so you can actually do the lab after the event yourself in a sandbox environment. All right, let's talk about what is the biggest challenges with devices. I think there's a lot of challenges with devices, but here are the three really big key ones. One is developing and maintaining a secure connection and also be able to support many different devices. With this, we actually offer many different open source SDKs, and these SDKs, we have them in different languages. They're in C, .NET, so C#, Java, Node.js, and Python. So this is all about making it easy to connect your devices to Azure IoT Hub. And we have SDKs that actually helps you with the device provisioning service. So those are completely open source in different languages, but really helps you get connected to Azure IoT Hub. The next challenge that folks face is integrating their devices and their data into cloud services. And really what that's about is easily be able to connect and send messages to the cloud. And our answer to that is IoT Hub. IoT Hub is the way to have that communication, bi-directional communication from your device to the cloud. So we have that offering, and if you want a super big deep dive in IoT Hub, check out our last workshop. The next big challenge, it would be the out-of-box provisioning of devices at scale. This is where you have tons of devices and you need to get it connected, you need to provision them, you need to configure them, and how do you do that? And that's where device provisioning service comes to play. So this is all about long-term device management. So when we think about IoT device management, we think about it in a couple different stages. The first one being, the plan stage. This one's all about what are the devices that you have, who should have access to those devices, what is the long-term strategy with these devices, and then the second stage is actually provisioning. This is all about securely authenticating devices on board for management and provision for service. The next part is configuration. So you're going to provide updates, configuration, and applications are assigned with the purpose of each device. Next part of the management lifecycle for devices is being able to monitor it. Monitor those devices are really important. What is the health of that device? Has it been hacked? What is going on with that device? So this is a really important thing, important part of the actual life cycle. And then the final part of the device lifecycle is retirement, and being able to revoke the device or be able to replace the device if needed. And that could be for many different reasons. One, you have a device that you need to replace because of failure. You have a device that's been compromised, or you have devices in the field that you're going to update with new devices. So there's a lot of reasons why retirement is, it's part of every device life cycle. And you can see this is a continuous life cycle. So you keep running through these stages. So let's talk about the stage of provisioning and why it's so difficult. Right now, solutions must have a way for each device to be easily revoked. And so it's, instead of just having all of like a group of devices, you need to be able to identify individual devices to revoke them if needed. The next challenge that folks have with provisioning is it's a manual process. When you think of IoT solutions, sometimes solutions require one device, but what if it requires thousands of devices? This could be extremely time consuming to sit there, to have an operator who'll sit there and manually provision every single device. And so having an easier process is really required, especially if you're trying to go from proof of concept to production and continuing to scale out with more devices. The initial configuration can become completely irrelevant between manufacturing and deployment. And I'll get into that scenario shortly, but you can imagine a device just sitting on, in storage and inventory, and then when it goes to use and maybe in a different country, you have to think about that deployment in those different areas and how that changes depending on how that device is being used. Next is the device supply chains are complicated and they're super complex. And so we'll dig into that in just a moment. So those are the top reasons why provisioning is hard. And the device provisioning service, these features is what makes it easier to face those challenges. So the top features that helps out with those type of challenges definitely would be, one is cross-region support and cross-subscription. So you go from DPS, which device provisioning service, and throughout this webinar workshop, you're going to hear me use the word DPS or device provisioning service. They're the same thing, so I might interchangeably say that. But DPS has that IoT hub support for geo-sharding and multi-tenancy solutions. This is really important if you have devices that are traveling globally, and that feature is really important. Being able to automatically re-provision supports the device lifecycle. So think about factory reset. What happens with migration? Migration from one IoT hub to another. So there's many different scenarios for that, where that's really important to be able to automatically do that. And the next one will be flexible target device assignment logic. So this is all about, how do you want to connect these to your different IoT hubs? Do you want to assign it to just one IoT hub? Do you have multiple IoT hubs that you have evenly weighted? Do you want it to have lowest latency based on the geo? So there's many reasons why having that flexibility will help you in different types of scenarios. Also being able to manage devices as a group or individuals. So you can have group enrollments and you can have individual enrollments per device. So this is based on authentication type. So if you have one device, you can easily just do an individual enrollment. And then of course, if you have many devices, group enrollment makes more sense. And then there's many different ways to be able to securely connect with DPS. So there's multiple options that are supported. That includes X509 certs, which we are going to use in the lab today, TPM endorsement key for secure storage and symmetric keys for just getting started. When you think of long-term security for your devices, we don't always recommend symmetric keys. That one's kind of the last resort, but it's also sometimes you just want to get started and maybe that's your only option. So we do support that. And then the open source SDKs, we do have the provisioning SDKs to support you, and then edge device support. So if you're using the IoT Edge runtime, we actually have edge device support for DPS. All right, let's dig into the different scenarios. So there's actually many different scenarios that device provisioning service supports. That's a lot more than that was listed on the slide, but I wanted to give an overview of the top 5 scenarios we see the most. The first one is really just bootstrapping your devices to IoT Hub in a single IoT solution. So this one's really that core scenario for device provisioning service can be used for, so that zero-touch provisioning. The next one is load balancing. This one's really one of the simplest multi-hub scenarios to think about. So devices can be allocated to different hubs to make management easier. And we'll dig into that in a couple more slides. The next scenario is ownership-based and multi-tenancy solutions. So for example, if you're selling widgets to multiple customers, you want to have data isolation. This is a really important scenario. You want to make sure that those devices connected to a hub for those customers who purchase them. So device provisioning service will give you that ability to do that. The next one is geolocation based, all about that geo sharding. So if you want a device to connect to IoT solution that it is closest to, that is one of the scenarios that DPS supports. And then last, reprovisioning. I really believe this one's the most important scenario. This one happens later in the device lifecycle. Reprovisioning can occur because device was maybe sold to another user. Maybe an example of that would be a lease of a car. The device maybe have moved because it's a vehicle and it needs to connect to a different region. Or maybe it just needs to get back to a security aspect. So maybe the device is installed in a sensitive location and the policy dictates that the device needs to be redeclared its identity maybe every 90 days or 30 days or even daily. So you can really use DPS to support that particular scenario. So where does DPS fit into the Microsoft IoT portfolio? So, we do have it in the Azure services. So if you are using our building IoT solutions the past way, we do have many different services to support that. And so device provisioning service is part of that. But if you're also building with Azure IoT Central, one thing to know with IoT Central, it's an IoT application platform for developing, managing, and maintaining IoT solutions. But in the backend, IoT Central is actually using the IoT Hub device provisioning service to manage all of the device registration and connections. So just keep that in mind, even if you're using Azure IoT Central, that DPS is actually in the background. All right, so when we talk about provisioning, what does that actually mean? It's when we say provisioning, it's actually 2 different steps. The first step is really called the provisioning setup, where it requires a human operator to first pre-register the device in an IoT solution. This is so the IoT solution knows that the device exists. Also, that human operator can also add some initial configuration for the devices. And the operator will also need to program the device to its target IoT solution. So that's really the first part of it. The second part is the actual device provisioning part. So this is when the device turns on, it establishes that connection to the IoT solution, where the device actually needs to prove that this is the device that that human operator has registered previously. So once that device is authenticated, it can go through some runtime assignments as well as gather some of the processes. So both of these steps are vital to be completely fully provisioned. So you need both steps. So I talked about IoT Hub and how it's meant for that bi-directional communication. You could easily register your device and have it connected to the cloud. And it's great if you have a small, solution or connecting one device, but when you are provisioning a lot of devices, it starts to get kind of challenging. So let me walk through this scenario. So you have multiple devices. You can connect it to IoT Hub, but what happens if we expand the scope a little bit? So once you have a couple devices, you need to assign each one of these individual devices to an IoT Hub connection string. So this actually is something you would not do. You would actually need to have a connection string for each one of these devices. So you can see it's starting to get a little harder to keep track of all of these devices and the IoT Hub connection string and where they're being assigned. So if you want to start assigning assisting devices to a new IoT Hub, this is extremely hard because now you will have to go back and program the device because each IoT Hub has a unique endpoint. And so you can imagine if you have to go back to all of those devices and change the connection string for all those devices, it can start being a little overwhelming. And it's not really a great way to scale. And it's not always feasible either. And especially if you want to reconfigure, it can be very difficult. So provisioning can be tedious and a manual process, especially if you're adding tons of devices and need to expand your IoT solution. So that initial device assignment may need to change once the device is successfully provisioned. So that's where the IoT Hub device provisioning service comes along. This is as mentioned before, can simplify the provisioning setup and allow for late assignments of IoT devices to IoT hubs. So let me give an example of how this all works. So let's go ahead and jump into one device. And we want to link it to one IoT hub, and we'll have one singular DPS setup. And just so you know, you can actually have up to 10 IoT hubs linked to one device provisioning service. So the first step is after the device is manufactured, the device enrollment information is added to device provisioning service. This is the only manual step in the process that's part of the provisioning setup. So this is really when we say zero-touch provisioning, what we mean by that. This is really the first manual step on this and the only manual step. The second part is at some point afterwards, it could be a day or several months after, the device is going to go online. And when it goes online, it's going to connect to device provisioning service to find its IoT home. And so when it does that and when it connects online, that's when DPS actually works with the device and goes through authentication handshake using that device identity info. DPS actually verifies the device identity that way. The next part of this would be that device provisioning service actually registers the device to IoT Hub and then populates the initial desired device state. Next, IoT Hub returns the connection info for the device. So it's going to sit there and give that information of what is that device connection string. And then that's when the device provisioning service gives the device the IoT Hub connection info. After that, the device now establishes a connection with IoT Hub. Then it retrieves the initial configuration from IoT Hub. It makes any changes, updates, if required. Now the device can start sending telemetry up back to IoT Hub. And once that telemetry is in IoT Hub, it all depends on your IoT solution. So at that point, we always kind of talk about that things, insights, and actions. So once you have that telemetry, you can use it to be consumed by your backend business logic. Your business logic will sit there and produce insights, which will then transform into commands to the device to operate more efficiently. And so this whole loop will continue. So you'll continue to send telemetry up, you'll continue to gather insights and do some sort of actions with it. So I wanted to go into re-provisioning at scale. And so we talked about how, device provisioning service can, easily help with provisioning, registering or configuring your devices. But what happens if you need to re-provision all of these devices? So a good example of this is when, if you have devices and you're a company and the company maybe gets acquired or maybe you get bought out, those devices that you own, maybe it's sold to another user, another company, those devices now need to connect to another region. So that's where DPS can be extremely powerful. So for example, we have all of these devices connected to IoT Hub, maybe in East US, and that's connected to your IoT Hub, but you maybe need to switch regions. So you can actually use a device provisioning service to simply change the IoT Hub assignment. This will allow devices to send out a new provisioning request to fetch new IoT Hub information. So that means that all of your devices, without even changing the code, it's just changing the assignment, can then easily go into a new IoT Hub that maybe is new for the company or other scenarios that might support that as well. And again, as I mentioned, there's no need for change of the device code, which could be super powerful, especially if you have thousands of devices that you need to get moved and re-provision in a different location or a different IoT Hub. All right, so before we jump into developer tools, I do want to cover, where the support is for device provisioning service in our tiers. We do have basic and standard tier. Basic tier for IoT Hub is all about that sending telemetry up. So you get the device to cloud telemetry, but you don't get cloud to device telemetry because it's not bi-directional support, but DPS is still supported there. So just want to give that call out, and it's supported standard, of course, tier as well. And if you ever have a question about where that support is, you can always go here. This is the Azure IoT Hub pricing page. I always recommend that if you're just looking at the different tiers and what's supported in the different tiers and SKUs. This is just a really easy page to check out, and it gives you a little bit more information on if you have S1, what is the cost, for a device provisioning service. All right, let's jump into developer tools. So we do have support for Azure IoT for our different tooling. So we do have, Visual Studio Code support. We do have or Visual Studio support, and then we have Visual Studio Code support with our IoT Hub toolkit. We'll go through that in a moment. And then we also have an extension if you're using the Azure IoT CLI extension, and this is really handy. And then part of VS Code is that we do have a device workbench extension. This is really handy if you're trying to connect devices from our device catalog, or maybe you have an MX chip or ESP32 or other supported devices. It's really nice because there are different sample code that you can get started pretty quickly on. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the lab. So we're going to, as a reminder, we're going to create an IoT Hub. We're going to deep dive into device provisioning service. I'm going to give a lot of tips along the way. We're going to talk about group enrollments and then work with X509 certificates. Then we're going to send telemetry up to IoT Hub to make sure everything's working. We'll dig into the device twin and make sure that not only do we have device to cloud messaging working, but that we have cloud to device working as well. And then we'll deep dive into provisioning. All right, so go ahead and get into the Azure portal. As I mentioned before, we have all of these different tooling options. So there's many different ways to actually create an IoT Hub. And so we won't deep dive into every single one of those options today, since we only need to create one IoT Hub. So we're going to do that through the portal. So make sure you have your Azure subscription ready and handy. So I have one already. If you're going through tutorials on Microsoft Learn, which we'll go to that site at the end of the workshop, they are sandbox environments. So you will get an Azure subscription in the sandbox environment, so you don't need one. However, if you want to get an Azure subscription, we do have great offerings, and you can do this with the free tier as well if you're just wanting to get started. And I always like to mention to people, if you set up and you have a subscription, you're all good to go, and it doesn't actually show up where you have subscription, make sure that your subscription is selected as a global subscription, because if you don't see it, most likely it's because it didn't automatically default as a global subscription. So just double check that, and that way you know you have it nice and ready. All right, so let's go ahead and create an IoT Hub. So I've created a couple already, but I'm just going to go through this process just so you can see how to create an IoT Hub. And you can do this a couple different ways. You can go through the marketplace. I just went straight to actually just my home page, but let me go ahead and show you the other ways you can do this as well. So you can create a new resource. And then under Internet of Things, you actually will see IoT Hub, and then you will see the IoT Hub device provisioning service. So you're going to want to create both of these because your device provisioning service will link to an IoT hub that you have set up. So I'm just going to create an IoT hub again. I'm going to use existing resource group. And I'm going to go ahead and assign a region. I'm just going to assign West to represent Redmond and go ahead and name an IoT hub. So I'm just going to say workshop part 3, and that is available. We're going to go to size. Again, you can choose the different tiers. IoT Hub is supported in all of these different tiers. The free tier, you could do this getting started with DPS with the free tier if you want. I'm just choosing standard tier, mostly because I'm not paying the bill, but it's very up to you which tier makes sense for your application. So I'm going to go ahead, review and create. You can see that I have the different, I have West as my region. I have it part of my resource group that is dedicated to this workshop, have my subscription all going and some more information. I go ahead and create it. So while that's working, that magic and deployment is underway. Let's go ahead and go back to creating a resource, go back to Internet of Things, and we're going to create a device provisioning service. And you're going to see it is just as easy to create an IoT hub as it is as easy as it was to create that IoT hub, the same with the device provisioning service. So let's go ahead and just have workshop DPS. I'm going to choose that same resource group, same location, going ahead and creating. So why those create? I always recommend people to check out the products available by region, because you're going to notice that DPS is not supported in every single region that IoT Hub is supported in. So it's just good to see when it's coming along. So for example, in Central India, we do have time that we are going to make that live and expect it. So this is just a really great way to see where our products are available by the different regions. All right, let's go here. Now, earlier I created a DPS, but I just wanted to showcase how easy it was to create one. So let's go ahead. Go to DPS, my workshop DPS. So I have a dummy account here, all set up. So here, let's dig into the different parts of the device provisioning service and how to get that connected to the IoT hub that you just created. So first, we're going to take a look around. So well, the first place I'm going to go is the manage allocation policy. This is what we talked about earlier on. You could have different ways, policy assignments, devices, the way that they're linked to your IoT hub. So you can have evenly weighted. Evenly weighted really is all about evenly, it's evenly shares the devices across the linked IoT hub. So if you're provisioning devices to only one IoT hub, we recommend this setting. It's a default setting. And then we also have the lowest latency. Again, it is all about, those assigned devices to that link IoT hub will result in the lowest latency communication between device and IoT hub. And then static configuration is all about this policy requires a desired IoT hub to be listed in the enrollment entry for that particular device to be provisioned. Let's just keep with default, and we recommend this one for most scenarios. Next part that you're going to want to do is actually link your IoT hub that you created. So I created an IoT hub earlier. You can see that my IoT hubs are the ones I just created are still in deployment, and to be, to go quicker on showcasing this in the workshop, the lab, I just created an IoT hub earlier. Normally doesn't take very long, but just for time, I already pre-created it. So a way that you can link your IoT hub. All you're going to do is hit add, and is as easy as choosing which IoT hub that you want linked to device provisioning service. As a reminder, you can have up to 10 linked IoT hubs, and so it's always good to know how many that you can have supported. So we already have one here ready to go. You can see that everything's good. This is West US. I had the tiers S1 and what the name is and the connection string for that particular IoT hub. And if you're ever forgetting the steps for creating, for linking or just getting started with device provisioning service, I always recommend to check out the quick start because it'll sit there and go step by step, and it's a pretty straightforward process, but there's little steps along the way, so it's always good to have this right here in the portal. We do have documentations and on the Azure site and tutorials, but it's good to see this right in the portal. So we did the second step, which is link your device provisioning service and IoT hub. That way, the device provisioning service can go ahead and register those devices into that hub. We also set up an allocation policy already, and we did evenly weighted on the different IoT hubs. Really, we only have one IoT hub assigned and linked, so it really doesn't make that big of a deal, but it's default. And then it goes through other steps too and gives you guidance like how do you set up your device during the manufacturing process, which we'll go through together, how to add a device unique security artifacts to the DPS, pretty much how to enroll a device and manage your enrollments. We're not going to click on that because we are actually going to go through that right now. So there's no reason for us to click on that tutorial, but if you're in the portal and want to know how to do that, you can right there. And then it's tutorials on how to start and verify your device, which we're going to do again today. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our enrollments, which is the next step. So you have the option of individual enrollment, or you have an option of group enrollment. And today we are going to focus on group enrollment. And you can see we already have a group enrollment for this workshop, but I'm going to go ahead and show how to create a group enrollment. So this is pretty straightforward, but we're going to go through different elements of this, and that way you understand some options that you have on your side. So you can easily create a name. So for this one, let's go ahead and say workshop demo DPS, and you can choose if you want to use X509 certs or symmetric key. Again, if you want to get started quickly and really see how to work with device provisioning service, you can go with the symmetric key, but just really consider the pros and cons if you're going to be using that in, in your actual production. So definitely we recommend using certificates. So for this example, we're going to click certificate. You also have support where you can sit there and say, is this device that's going into this group enrollment, is it going to be an IoT Edge device? And what that means is that this device is using the IoT Edge runtime. And so that none of our devices today is using the IoT Edge runtime. So we're just going to keep that as false. If you switched it to true, there's more information you can share there, but we're just going to keep it as false for this moment. And then you're going to say your certificate type. So for this example, we are going to be using a CA certificate. This one's already made for us. I created one earlier, and so this one is just makes life easier that it's already there and available. If you are interested in, playing around with CA certificate and want to get started with that, we do have a sample, a helper script that you can check out. And so that one, I do recommend if you are looking at that to keep in mind that these are just helper scripts. Do not use this in production. And there's a couple different reasons for that, and we can jump into it, but for right now, just keep in mind that if you're going to just use a helper script to come up with a CA certificate, that we do have a nice helper script for you, but I would not recommend that in production. And while we're talking about this, let's go ahead and just talk about X509 certificate in general. And so this is a really, I'm going to give a really high level overview of the certificate type. But keep in mind, we have tons of resources on this on docs that you can view to get more insights on this, because this can get really complicated really quickly. So for the certificate type, high level, when we're thinking about security and high level certificates, we have a concept of public and private key encryption. So a public key enables data to be encrypted. The use of this key distorts text of the message. So let's say you have a message and now it's encrypted. You have no idea what that message says now. And so the private key is used to decrypt this message back into its original text. The public key cannot be used to decrypt this message. So really high level what public and private key encryption. For those private keys, you need to keep that secret. And to keep that secret, the public key infrastructure is needed to prevent these keys from becoming lost or stolen. This infrastructure is potentially a disadvantage for public and private key systems. However, the X509 certificates with the Azure Device Provisioning Service, the public key infrastructure is actually built into this service. We or you, just user in general who's using DPS, we won't even know what and we don't need to know, we don't know or own our private keys. The private keys are generated by helper tools that are publicly available. The keys are stored in the X509 certificates, and the user doesn't, we don't really need to do much more than upload those to Azure DPS. and the password protects the content of the private key. And so I know that's super high level, but just keep in mind that that public key infrastructure is built into device provisioning service. So for this example, you're going to want to upload your certificate that you have. So I've actually have a certificate, a CA certificate already ready to go. So went ahead and created it. You can select it. And again, I created it by using this helper script. So you select your primary certificate, you say how you want to assign the devices to the hub, and then you need to make sure you actually have the IoT hub that this is linked to. And so if you don't see anything here, you need to make sure that you're linking to your IoT hub that you want DPS to work with. We did it earlier when we were in the device provisioning service, and when in the section in the blade that says link your IoT hub. So we've already done this. And then there's a second other part of this is you can select how you want device data to be handled in re-provisioning. So there's actually a couple options when it comes to re-provisioning that you can look into. And there's actually a couple reasons why you might even think about re-provisioning. So kind of what I talked about before, you know, if devices would say move to different locations, network latency is approved by having the device migrated to a closer IoT hub. Another one would be multi-tenancy. Another scenario with provisioning would be a solution change, or maybe even if it's quarantine. Example of that would be if a device is the device that you manufactured maybe is something happened to it, maybe it was compromised, maybe it's out of date. That's a solution where you can sit there and you know, update, get it back to compliance, and once that device is functioning properly, then it can be migrated back to its main IoT hub. So that's another type of scenario. So you can see you actually have 3 different options here that you can choose if you ever need a re-provision. The first one, really, that's your default, the re-provision and migrate data. This one's pretty straightforward, and it's default for each one of those. The next one, re-provisioning, re-provision and reset to initial config. This one actually makes sense if you're looking to do a factory reset without changing any of the IoT hubs. So that's when you actually want to use that one. And then the never re-provision. This one means that the device is actually never going to be reassigned to a different hub. This policy really only makes sense when it's provided for managing backwards compatibility. So I would recommend sticking to the first default option, unless for some reason, which is a common scenario, you want to do a factory reset without changing the IoT hubs, and then consider that one. All right, so after you have selected all of those, you can go ahead and save. And then what's going to happen after you save? It will create that enrollment group. So I have an enrollment group. I went through the exact same stages, but the difference is I actually uploaded my certificates. And when you want to upload your certificates, you can actually do that by clicking on certificates. Let's see. Fresh. So we're just going to refresh the page. But when you want to add your certificates, you can go to that certificate section, part of the blade, and go ahead and upload. One thing to keep in mind, though, when you are uploading your root certificate, you need to make sure that the certificate, before it can even be used to authenticate devices to DPS, you actually need to establish proof of possession of that certificate. So I'm just going to go back home, go back to DPS. And this is probably on my side when it comes to connection, network connection. Hang with me for a bit. And while we're doing this, while I'm trying to get my network back up, what we can do is actually go to the next part, which is going ahead and jumping into the code. So we're going to want to actually create code that has a simulated device, and that this device is connected to device provisioning service. All right, I am back on. Network's good. Okay. Better, lightning fast. All right, so I'm gonna go back before we jump into that simulated device and how to create one. Let's go to certificates. You can see that you can upload your certificate here. So I already did my my root certificate, added it, and you can do the same as well. Again, make sure that you verify that certificate, because if you don't, it's actually not going to work. You need to actually verify that that is the certificate and proof of possession of that certificate. So have already done that. I have proven that the certificate is correct, it's verified, it's good to go, and so I can move on to the rest of the building the IoT solution. All right, so let's go ahead, go into the code. Now for the scenario, I actually have 2 devices already set up for this IoT hub, and we're going to create a third device. And before we jump into that, I want to show you something. As mentioned before, device provisioning service links to your IoT hub. You can see that we have the IoT hub workshop. 01 is our linked IoT hub, and you can find that IoT hub by going to IoT hub, actually seeing it. And if you go there, I want to showcase that when you go to see your devices, you're going to see all of the devices here, but I have 2 devices at the moment, and these devices were configured and provisioned and went through DPS and added to IoT hub. So we're going to add that third device securely. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go ahead and let's see, let's open a folder. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new project. And this project's all about creating a new simulated device and getting it connected to DPS. So I'm going to select that folder. And I'm going to do this in C#. And keep in mind, you can do this in many different languages. I'm just using C#. If you're looking for help on how to get started with other languages and working with our SDKs, we do have on GitHub, which are open source SDKs, Azure IoT SDKs, that you can go here and then look for the language that you prefer and the support there. So for example, the C# one, I just clicked on that link and it took me to different samples. So I'm also able to see, the provisioning support as well and how to get started there. So, and there's plenty of example codes, even this example code that was built, I built it off of the X509 sample. So it's all of the code is available for you, which is a great way to get started. All right, so let's go ahead and create a simulated device that we will connect to DPS. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up a new terminal. You can do that through hotkeys. You can do that many different ways, but you can also do it by going to terminal and opening it. Since we're using C#, before we get there, just want to say, make sure you have your extensions. If you're using C#, we do have a C# extension for VS Code. Also, if you're using C#, make sure you download .NET Core. This is really important to move forward. All right, so both of those are already installed. You can see that I've installed C# extension for VS Code. Good to go. Going back to my device 3 folder. So I'm going to go ahead and .NET new console. So really this command just creates a project.cs file in my folder, along with, the different project files with the project file. So that's good to go. I'm going to do .NET restore. This command really just gives you app access to the required .NET packages. And, the next step for us is we want to install the required libraries. So the libraries you're going to want to install is the Microsoft Azure Devices client, the Microsoft Azure Devices provisioning client, and the Microsoft Azure Devices provisioning transport AMQP library. And the libraries that you install also depend on the protocols you are using as well. So I'm going to go ahead, install .NET add package. Azure.devices.client. Make sure everything looks good. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and install the provisioning client. And then going ahead and install an additional library required. So it should be all good to go there. And you're going to see required assets to build and debug are missing. Make sure you hit yes, because what's going to give you is your VS Code assets that you need. All right, so let's go ahead. Now that we have got our files all ready to go, we're going to delete what we have in our program file. And we're going to take example code, and we'll dig into this example code, but I'm going to go ahead and take from my other devices code. I'm just going to copy all of that over. And this is really just based on the example code that we have from our on GitHub for samples. All right, so let's go ahead and dig into this. And I'm going to hit save. And there's a couple different things that you need to think about, and different parts of the code that is extremely important.
Hey, Pamela?
Yes.
This is Matt. When we had that connectivity problem, the captioning tool dropped. Could you refresh the screen, that browser screen, to start the captioning again?
I can.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. Thanks. Thanks, Matt. All right. Captioning is back on, so that looks good. All right, so main areas that you really need to look into. One is that global device endpoint. This is for DPS. Where you actually find this is when you're in the portal, go to your device provisioning service, and an overview, you're going to have the endpoint here. This is really important to add into your code. You're also going to need your ID scope. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And put it into the code. And you can see it was already here, but just showing. The next thing is you will also want your leaf certificate file name. And so I already have a leaf certificate for this device. So I'm going to actually pull that up just so you can see what I'm talking about. So I have a root certificate, but I also have leaf certificates for each one of those devices. So I have one right here for a third device already to go. So all I did was just say where to find that actual leaf certificate. And then let's go ahead and dig a little bit into the code itself. So the provisioning device client really, this is a really important part of this example code. Provisioning is really achieved by calling this single call to the provisioning device client. The .register async API. This is going to specify the global endpoint, your ID scope. Remember, the ID scope is unique for each one of your provisioning service deployment, and also that was created right when we created the DPS. And then it's also going to have the security provider and the provisioning transport handler. So you can see that we've already put the global device point and the DPS ID scope already up here, and it's ready to go. But this is just calling the single call is the magic for provisioning with a device provisioning service. we're going to dig a little bit more. This part of the code is really just all about sending the device logic from these simulated sensors. So we're, measuring temperature, humidity, and also we have a fan on, fan off part of the code as well. But this is just making sure that this messaging is going to Azure IoT Hub. And then it's also, let me bring this out a little bit more. It's also it's the code, part of the code that gives updates to the device with changes to the device twin properties. So I'll give an example here. Keep going down. You can see that we have our device client authentication. You can also see it loads the device twin properties since the device is just starting up. We can start reading and sending device telemetry, and then we can close the device client. This also says read the desired twin properties. If you were in the last workshop, Desire properties as a part of IoT Hub, device twin. Desire properties is used along with reported properties to synchronize device configuration or conditions. The solution backend can actually set the desired properties, and the device app can read them. The device app can also receive notification of changes in the desired properties. So just a refresher on what desired twin properties are. And then we should be coming up to reported twin properties. Reported properties, these are used along with the desired properties to synchronize device configuration and condition. So the device app can set the reported properties, and the solution backend can actually read and query them. And then the rest of the code is really the simulated telemetry, and also actually sending that telemetry message. All right, now that we've digged into the code, let's go ahead and just run. And what's going to happen is a couple different things, and you can let me bring this up more. So what's happening in the backend is that DPS is, it's validating the identity of the device by validating the registration ID and the key against the enrollment list entry using the X509 verification. The device provisioning service is registering the device with the IoT Hub, and it's populating the device desired state, twin state. Then the IoT Hub is returning the device ID information, DPS, and then DPS is returning the IoT Hub connection information to the device. And now you can see that we're actually sending telemetry up to the hub. So the device is completely connected to the hub, and we should be able to see this particular information and message when we go into the portal. So let's just check that everything's working. So here's our DPS. We know what our link hub is. If we want to go to your link hub, we can also go here. We know that this is our linked IoT Hub. So let's just check that everything is going great. You can see now that we now have a device called device 3 that is now already enabled. It's registered, it's provisioned, it's configured, and now it's in the IoT Hub. And so we can actually go to overview. And there's a couple different ways to get here too, but you can see if we look at our metrics that we're starting to get telemetry up. And one view I really like to showcase as well, you can add a metric. So let's dig into this. here's your IoT Hub standard metrics, and you can change a different view of metrics, but I want to showcase connected devices. So you can see that now we have a connected device here. And if I was going to reconnect all of my other devices, which I can, you'll start to see this going up because we have 3 devices total. 1 is running right now. But if I was running the other one, I could actually see this go up. And I'm going to actually just take this to max. All right, so this is a great way just to see the messages that are being sent, how many devices you have connected up. But that just shows that the device is actually connecting to the cloud and the messages are being sent to the cloud. But let's double check that we can send from the cloud to the device and do messaging that way. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go back to my devices in my IoT Hub. I'm going to connect and click on the device 3, which is the device we just created. And I am going to look at the device twin. And keep in mind, every time you create a new IoT Hub, you always get a device twin for it. And I want to go just do a quick check if everything is, if I can send back a message from the cloud to the device. So I think what we're going to do is going to do temperature, and I think I'm going to do my ideal temperature, which is 68 degrees. So let's go back here before I hit save. You can see that these are the messages being sent. We have telemetry all over the place with temperature and humidity, but I prefer it 68 degrees always. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save on the device twin. This is in desired properties. Let's take a look, and yes, so the reported twin property has shown, and so you can see that I got my ideal temperature, so I'm nice and warm. So feeling good, and so this is a great way to easily see that we just sent a message down. And that is device provisioning service. The next part that I really want to cover, first I'm going to stop this application. Stop this app. I just hit Control-C if you were wondering what I did to stop that from running. Next is all about deprovisioning devices. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back to my device provisioning service, which is Workshop DPS. And there's a couple different things that you need to do if you are deprovisioning. And there's actually 2 big steps that you need to do. The first one, you need to actually just disenroll the device from your provisioning service. And this is really important to prevent future auto provisioning. And you can do this with your enrollments by going ahead, clicking here. I'm in my manage enrollments. Here's the group enrollment that we've been using that whole time. And there's a couple ways that you can do this. So if you can choose to just completely delete it, or you can actually just go into it and disable. And this will temporarily disable for you, but today we want to completely just get rid of it. So I'm going to go ahead, delete. Do I want to remove the enrollment? Yes, I do. So you would think that if you remove the enrollment, you're all done. but you're not. You need the second step, and that is the deregistering your device from your IoT hub. And this is super important if you're trying to prevent future communication and data transfer. So you need to be able to do that, because remember, DPS is really linking to your IoT hub and creating that connection. So I'm going to go back to the IoT hub that had all of these devices. And I'm going to go ahead and delete. So do I wish to delete these selected devices? Yes, I do. And it's now ready for you, and it's all good. And you have got rid of that connection with your devices. You've removed device provisioning service. And you can see that even though I removed that group enrollment, those devices are still in that IoT hub. So it's really important that you do both steps. All right, so that is the lab part of the device provisioning service. I'm going to go ahead and go to showcasing some of the developer resources to help you get started. That way you can have this fun after this class. All right, so we're going to go to this link, and it's aka.ms Securely Connect Devices Learning Path. And where this is going to take you is Microsoft Learn. Microsoft Learn has been around for the last probably 1.5 years now, and it's all about sandbox environment learning. And so these are mini tutorials for you to go ahead and learn how to work with our services and get started. So this one is actually, this link takes you to a learning path, and a learning path is a collection of different modules to help you get up-ramped on all things Azure IoT. So this one is Securely Connect IoT Devices to the Cloud. And there is the automatically provision your IoT devices securely and at scale with the device provisioning service. And this one will deep dive a little bit more on X509 certificates and how it works. I know I went really high level on it, but just to give you the idea, and then also how to make one as well. And so we recommend that you check that out. Keep in mind, the online sandbox environment lasts for about 2 hours. So after 2 hours, you lose those resources. So you can also follow along this tutorial with your own Azure subscription too. And I really recommend that because you can do this with the free tier. And so it's nice to have those resources already in your resource group. And then we also have the intro for Azure IoT Learning Path. So if you wanted to learn more about IoT Hub or IoT Central or all of our different services and just get your feet wet with it, recommend to check out that learning path. And then, of course, we have the upcoming online workshop that you can check out as well. Some more resources for you. If you're just starting to think about building an IoT solution, really recommend checking out the Azure IoT Reference Architect Guide. It's I believe 79 pages. Don't quote me on that, but it's a really jam-packed of information that talks about what are the subsystems of building an IoT solution, you know, going from things, insights and actions, what are the different services that we would recommend across the different subsystems of building an IoT solution. So definitely check that out. We just talked about the MS Learn learning paths. And then also, if you are just really just brand new of IoT in general, or just Azure IoT in general, we do have a developer's guide. And the developer guide is really nice because it goes through and showcases things to think about, but really high level the elements of IoT. So it's really a true online guide. It's free, and I think it's extremely useful, and it's one of the first places I would recommend to check out. And then we have our Azure IoT docs for tutorials, getting started, how-to guides, tons of reference papers and white papers. And then IoT Show, just doing a plug here. You know, we have a new episode every Monday, and then in the month of June, starting June 18th, I believe, we are actually going to be doing a full series where we release every Monday of deep dives. So these are 45-minute episodes where we deep dive into, you know, a new feature that just got released at Build, and new features that were just GA, so you can actually see how they work and how to get started with them. And then lastly, I would recommend checking out the IoT tech community. So we have a lot of members there. Would love for you to join. It's a great way to get a hold of myself, other folks in the engineering team, and ask questions. It's also a great place to share your projects. We love to see what people are building. Also be able to ask questions. So if you are stuck on something or need, you know, more resources on something, ping us on Tech Community. You're able to join, and you can see that there's many different conversational space there, from Azure IoT, Windows IoT, devices, even a space for makers. So if you like working with Arduinos or Pis, we do have a space for you. Azure Security Center, Azure Sphere, Maps, robotics, and the community is growing. So love for you to join us. So I just want to thank everyone for joining this workshop, and super excited for all of you to, you know, go and check out that learning path and do the same lab and be able to provide feedback. So thank you so much for joining, and looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you. Have a great day.